Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Grand Rounds. My name is Tom Fowden. I'm the chair and organizer of Grand Rounds, and I'm freshly back from China, which was an experience, let's say that. I've been asked a couple of times already, would I do a Grand Round on my experiences in China? So we'll maybe think about that for the new year, because it's medicine in China is certainly not like medicine is here. I'm grateful to colleagues who stood in for me in the last couple of weeks for chairing Grand Rounds, and the videos have been recorded. I've not yet had the chance to edit them, but I will do that quickly and then get them put onto the YouTube channel so you can see those talks. This week, there's been a slight snafu in that there are two separate meetings at the same time. So there's this Grand Round where we're going to talk about the impact of screen time on the development of young people. But also there is the Ronald Harden Awards, which are happening in the Postgraduate Medical Education Centre, which is on Teams. So if you're here expecting to hear the Ronald Harden Awards, that's on Teams. I'll post the link into the chat so you can reach that. Otherwise, please do stay here with us for this talk. So when I was a lad in the 70s and 80s, my parents told me to get away from the TV screen because it would send my eyes square, and that I would have poor eyesight. I would have poor hearing from sitting too close to the telly. I would get weak and I would not be strong because I'm too busy sat in front of a TV screen or a video game. And here we are 40 years later, and we have the same concerns, but it's with small screens. My kids are grown up now, so they are surgically attached to a phone, but I think it's a concern for many people, parents particularly, but I think for lots of folk worried about the effects that being attached to a small screen, be it an iPhone or an iPad or other device, is having on the development of our children. So when Una wrote to me a number of months ago asking if she could have a Grand Round slot with colleagues to talk about this, I was delighted to offer the slot. We have a number of speakers who are going to talk about their own specialist expertise in this area. So I think we're going to start with Helen Dunn, who's one of our consultant pediatric colleagues, who I think is going to talk about the effect on children in general. But then we're going to have talks about eyes, about ears, about speech development. We were due to have physio, I think, but I think they're not available right now. But we'll maybe catch up with that later. So I'm going to leave Helen to kick off and then introduce the speakers that come thereafter. If you have a question, then please do put it into the chat. There will be time at the end to ask questions in person, and I'm very much looking forward to the talk. I think you can see by the number of participants in the room, the virtual room today, that we're nearly nudging 80, that this is a popular topic and something of great interest to many people. So thank you to Una for reaching out in the first place, and to all our speakers today for joining with us. If you're in the room, please do mute your microphone unless you're speaking. And like I say, questions in the chat. Thanks very much, Helen. Thank you for your forbearance, and on we go.
Okay, can I just check that everybody can see my screen?
We can
Yes,
see the screen in the format it's in. Yes.
Good, and I'll check that we can move on. Yeah, so as Tom said, my name's Helen Dunn. I'm a general and community paediatrician. And the reason that we wanted to bring screen time as a focus here is on this poster that you can see on the first slide is from Health Professionals for Safer Screens. And they're a group of paediatricians, educationalists from all around the UK who just started to become a little bit concerned about how our young people screens just have come into their lives. There's not been any sort of regulation, and what does it mean for them? So it's a really good resource. So if you don't get to listen to much more than the rest of this talk, it's to signpost you to this Health Professionals for Safer Screens. It's got lovely posters. It's got really good information for all ages. I also have to ask to thank Dr. Louise Milne and Dr. Kelly Brown from the college, as there was a recent presentation from them, and I have lifted quite a few of their slides because they give the most up-to-date information, and they allowed me to do so. So, can you see, has it moved on? Thumbs up, great. This is just a quick zoom through how quickly things have changed from having a brick phone through to having 1.6 billion users on TikTok and more children with smartphones than two parents. And that the main point is that the iPhone's 18. this year, meaning all of our kids have been exposed to smartphones. This is the norm for our kids now, and I don't think this will surprise you if the parents among you in the audience. But the extent of it is just reaching down younger and younger. So, 80% of 10-year-olds and 30% now of 67-year-olds have their own smartphone. And then that reaches even down further. We're now at about 40% of 3 to 5-year-olds. They mostly use YouTube, as you can see from this graph, but as you get older, more and more of the social media sites come into play. We're not even going to touch on gaming, that's a totally different matter. And this is more just about actual total screen time. We know the impact it can have on home life, because it's not just about the kids that are on the screen, it's about us as adults being on them. But the main issues for kids are amount of time spent on, what kind of contact are they having on screens, and what content are they looking at. This is a term I hadn't heard of before, technoference, about the interruption between development, between the adults and children, when we just put screens in front of them from a very young age. They've not got the range to self-regulate it, as most adults don't either. Early years, this is a slide just covering a lot of the concerns that are going to be discussed in more detail later on. The speech and language and obesity and eyesight are going to be covered, but I thought I'd do a little bit more on very early on. You can see down the side of this this slide all the things that are now coming to very, very young children and babies, that parents almost feel like they have to give screens to them at a very young age, and that that this is the right thing to do and it's really educational, when really we want them to do the things that are on the other side. Face-to-face time, interaction with real toys. We're seeing a generation that don't really know how to play, to be perfectly honest. That was just about the technoference, a little bit more detail about it. And we're all guilty of this, as they make them very addictive. Teenagers, with 2 in my house, I can totally see that they need their phones for social interaction, but it's how much are they exposed to? And that's when we come on to the worries that we have about safeguarding. 50% of 11 to 13-year-olds have seen pornography online, but most of it is by accident. Most of it's just put through on their social media feed. Child sexual abuse and online child sexual abuse, I think, is a really big hidden thing. I think there's a lot more families where their child, especially teenagers, are involved in this, and people are embarrassed, so they don't actually go to tell other folk or get help. And boys are targeted by organised crime groups to get money from them, and often with child sexual abuse, it's the child themselves or the teenager who's, exploring sexuality, think that this is a normal thing to do. But the worrying thing is it's increasing trend in the younger age groups as well. And I don't think this is quite sharing the way I wanted it to, because this has got lots of different information on it about the different types of things that teenagers in particular are viewing, from the thinspiration videos, from brain rot stuff, which just is meaningless rubbish coming through to you, the challenges that can be dangerous, and the Sephora kids. Those pictures are on the background. Apologies, it's not sharing quite the same way. I'll share my slides with Tom so that you can see them properly. And that's up to date. The Charlie Kirk event, a huge number of kids saw that killing online. And it's not stuff we would want them to see. And people, I think, are unaware of how, ubiquitous it is. From a mental health point of view, we know that the age of your first smartphone directly correlates with a decreased mental well-being in your teenage and early 20s. At the really sad side of it, these are some testimonies from parents whose children had taken their own life due to things that had happened with their exposure to things online. So then you'd say, why is it not an easy campaign? We managed to put restrictions on energy drinks because they affect your concentration and your sleep and everything, but it's just not happening with screen time because big tech fund it all. Everyone is of the opinion, oh, well, there's nothing we can do about it. But as you'll see from the presentations by my colleagues, it is actually having a physical impact on our kids as well as a mental impact. Some of the things that we could do, these are in your own house. Be aware of what your kid is on. Be aware of having either Google Family or the iPhone family accounts where you can actually switch it off overnight. You can restrict which apps that people are accessing. And I think that there's just a general lack of awareness of your ability to be able to do that. And there's just a selection of questions you might want to ask in your house around it. Also be aware of your own time on an iPhone or on a whichever phone. Check how long you're using it. All the apps can have things that remind you to stop after 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and I think they're really useful. Just to give you an idea of how long you're spending on it, because you can quite easily go down rabbit holes. There's just some more advice here for digital health. Like I say, try and keep a phone out of the bedroom at night time. And what happens is once it happens and once it's happened for a week, you then just forget that you need to do it. So it becomes a non-issue. You think it's not causing any harm, but you don't know at which point that it will. Tablets, screens, phones, they're all here to stay, but it's how can we make it safer for our younger, our kids and our teenagers. So just back to this page, this is a really nice bright poster that gives you an idea of how much time we think that kids at different ages should spend on screens. And it has different impacts at different ages, as my colleagues will tell. Thank you very much.
Who is our next speaker? Hello.
I am. I'm just going
Marvelous.
to share my screen. Tell me it's working. Is that okay?
Marvelous. Thank you, Ruth. That's perfect. And we can hear you, which is
Yay!
that's a little joke there, you see.
I got it. Yeah, so I'm Ruth Edgar. I'm the paediatric team leader for audiology in Tayside. And I was just going to talk a little bit about digital media and auditory responsiveness in children. I came along because Kate, speech and language therapist, stopped me in the car park and said, do you want to be part of this? And I stupidly said yes. But yeah, no, it is good to give some sort of say to audiology. And I'm hoping my screen will move on. Yes, it does. So basically what I was blethering to Kate about was that we have noticed locally and nationally, so not just Scottish, like the whole of the UK, have noticed that we're having a lot more referrals for children who are being referred in for speech and communication delay rather than the old-fashioned hearing problem. So why does this matter? So who cares? So to kind of go a step back, how do we test children? So we test children that are 6 months plus. When they're babies, we do electrophysiology testing, but when they're 6 months plus, we test them using visual reinforcement audiometry. And what that is, it takes two testers. We have a tester in the room and a tester that's out the room in the observation room. And we put some sounds into a room and we give the child a visual reward. The sounds are specific wobble tones. They're quite a simple sound. And then we show the child the reward, and then the child hopefully turns to it. And then eventually we stop giving them clues and things, and they then give us a nice audiogram. That's how it's meant to work. When they're a little bit older, they go on to do conditioned play audiometry. So this is normally for about 2+. Well, it was. And what they do is they pop a little penny in a pig when they hear the sound, or a wee man in a boat, whenever they hear the simple wobble tone, frequency specific sound. nice and simple. However, what we're finding is many of the children that come in due to speech delay don't respond to that simple wobble tone. What they're needing is more familiar tunes like Cocomelon and Miss Rachel, Peppa Pig, which is great because it rules out any sort of profound deafness. So we know that they're responding to sound, but it really isn't a frequency specific hearing test, and it doesn't rule out any mild deafness. So we have to then go on and do some more testing. So what does that mean? It means an increased number of appointments for these families and for our service. And then quite often we're having to, well, more often now than we've ever done before, we're having to then go on to do further testing using the electrophysiology testing where a child has to be asleep. We're looking at the brainstem response to sound. We've locally got a service using melatonin to settle the child, which has been quite successful, but more recently, over the last year and a half, we've done quite a few children in theatre because they've just not settled for melatonin. So obviously that's quite a difference to what it used to be when we used to just test them using wobble tones. And yet, like we've all been saying, we've noticed, from COVID-19, it does appear typical for young children to be entertained using tablets. So just like Helen was saying, they just come in with the screens on the pram and they've got their mobile phone, and as soon as the parent turns away, the parent's on the mobile phone. And as Helen was saying, we all, we are aware of the recommendations by the World Health Organization, but I don't think many families are, and certainly we're not seeing that in the clinics. So I thought, when Kate stopped me and I was like, oh, what is there out there actually? So I did a little bit of looking about for anything about auditory responsiveness and screen time. And really, there's not much out there at all. But there was one study by Dr. Josephine Marriage, who is an audiologist from UCL. And she actually wrote our British Society of Audiology recommendations for infant testing. She was one of the authors on that. Anyway, she actually published an article last year on this. So I thought, fantastic, I'll have a little look at that. So Dr. Marriage's study looked at two groups of children. The first group were classed as unresponsive to frequency-specific audiological testing. So they're the ones that didn't like our simple wobble tone testing. And what they did was they did adapted testing. So they took actually like a Cocomelon sound tune or a Peppa Pig tune. They actually put it so that they could make it a little bit more frequency specific. So that so it was going into broad bands, and they tested the child that way. So they could rule out any significant hearing loss there. But however, it was not testing individual frequencies. And the second group of children did the test like we used to do, no problem. So that was great. And what the findings was that children with a higher amount of screen time during year 1 and year 2 were much, much more likely to need the adapted testing. Okay. And the unresponsive group had significantly smaller vocabularies than the responsive group at 12 and 24 months. So there does seem to be a connection between the screen time, the lack of kind of conditioning to these simple sounds, and the vocabulary. And then on top of that, the unresponsive group showed lower social attention and communication skills. So although it's kind of quite obvious to us, it was kind of good to read some evidence about that. So what I did locally was we looked at some figures, our referrals from April and May last year. And we had a little look at sort of like what's happening with audiology locally. I looked at all the children that were referred in for speech and language and communication concerns. So ruled out all the ones that have been referred in for glue ear and all of that. These were just ones that have been referred in for this alone. And a third of the patients required more testing. So that's quite a significant amount and I actually didn't look into how many times they required more testing. I just looked at, did they need more testing? So I need to do a deeper dive into that to say, did they need melatonin testing? Did they need a GA? And what numbers we're looking at that, but this is just a brief overview. And then 65% of them, of the same group, but they didn't need retesting, they were discharged with satisfactory hearing. So we managed to get them and discharge them. And there was very few that actually needed, we had one child that needed aiding, but that child actually had come from abroad and already had hearing aids and was picked up by speech and language because nobody else referred them in. But yeah, so it shows us that the majority of these children do have normal hearing, but there's something there like listening side of things that are a problem, and social communication is a massive issue. So what I looked at was kind of like, well, what does this really tell me? So one, limited research, possibly need to do something locally, and really just signing myself up to something there. But yeah, probably need to look at that a little bit more just to kind of get a better idea. Anecdotally, a large amount of screen time in the early years appears to be associated with poorer auditory and social skills. I think we've all seen that, everybody here. In practice, well, what will I do with this information? So basically, I think I will be more proactive at sort of speaking to families about screen time. I will be explaining to them about this evidence, and hopefully they will reduce that screen time down. The other thing that I spoke to my colleagues about this, and we're kind of like, you know, what do we want to kind of get out there too? And what we wanted to kind of make sure is that professionals referring into audiology were well aware of the challenges about testing some of these children. We're getting more and more children that there's not a hearing problem with, there's no concerns regarding hearing, but we understand that these children, we need to rule out a hearing issue. We've introduced a new referral form, and the reason for that is because it gives us a lot of information. It's going to allow me to do a little bit more research into the referral trends, and also ensures that the child is seen at the appropriate clinic with the appropriate audiologist with the appropriate skill set. So I know it's a bit more bulky than what we used to ask for, but there is a reason behind that. But the other thing that we've noticed is there's a lot of the times that parents will come into us and the parents are not concerned about the hearing at all. We are testing their hearing. It's taking us some time, and the parents say to us, oh, we're not getting referred on to X, Y, and Z until the hearing results. And that concerns me slightly when the parents aren't. And what we were sort of thinking as an audiology department, and actually Helen's probably helped with this afternoon, but what advice can we give for these families to kind of move away from the screen time? Because although we can say don't do it, some of the families just don't know what to replace it with. They don't know how to actually sit down with their child and play with their child. So I was thinking like a nice little leaflet that would give just nice hints and tips on how to play would probably benefit these families as well. Anyway, that is me. I hope that was some use. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ruth. The irony is not lost on me that there are now 91 of us sat in rooms looking at screens, hearing about the dangers of screens. But this is the positive side, is it not? That 91 people are able to come and listen to this talk where we maybe perhaps wouldn't have been able to do that. And I'm going to guess Una's at home even, so from her background. So it does give us great flexibility, doesn't it? And there are some positives to these things, but this is great to hear some evidence about what screens effect screens are having. So the next I have on my running order is Sheena. Is that right?
That is correct. And
So-
I've got my able assistant with me, I hope.
That's me, isn't it?
Oh, it is you now. Thank you very much, Tom. I thought
It is Tom.
because I didn't trust myself, Sheena. Zoom's not my
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
Let me share my screen then, so that
Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got evidence from the 27 to 30-month developmental screening, which is indicating that communication development in children is the biggest reported developmental concern. And that correlates with evidence from staff in nurseries that fewer children are starting with them with the expected communication skills. So I did the same thing as Ruth. I went and looked for some evidence of some research that had been done. This is a small scale research study from Sweden, and it represents a growing interest in the impact of digital media on children's communication development. They recruited 92 parents of children aged 25 months in Sweden, and they recorded their home sound environment during a typical day and participated in an online questionnaire relating to daily digital media use. So, unsurprising from what we've heard already, the negative associations for communication development were around a significant access to TV, whether it was big screen or tablets, parental use of digital media, during everyday child-focused routines. But we saw positive associations where there were lots of child-parent interactions, joint media engagement, and shared book reading in particular. Okay, next slide, please. So a number of studies that we are aware of as speech and language therapists show that the parent-child interactions are very important. They're almost more important than the number of words a child hears. When the parent's engaging with their child, they're supporting the child's communication development, they're interacting, they're taking turns, they're talking about what the child's doing. Usually means that the vocabulary they're using is relevant to the activity. That supports the child to develop their understanding of language and expand their vocabulary. There's a foundation in America called LENA, which stands for Language Environmental Analysis. And they've done quite a lot of research into this. And they have demonstrated the link between conversational turns and brain function, social emotional development, reading skills, executive functioning. They've also done a study around long-term outcomes, and they find that there's a correlation between the amount of conversational turns children experience between 18 and 24 months, and then their verbal abilities and their IQ scores as teenagers. So it's interesting, nothing that anyone's saying today is coming up with anything different. And just out of interest, I'll tell you now that LENA research is currently recommending 40 interactions, conversational turns per hour a child's a week. So next slide, please. The Swedish study was asking parents about their digital media use, and we were quite interested in this. We're obviously aware that children have lots of access to digital media themselves, but what is the issue if adults, the parents, are accessing digital media a lot? And Helen talked about technoference and this was a term that I hadn't heard of until I was doing a bit more research for today. But it's the reduced opportunities for interaction with an adult that the child gets. So just out of interest, if you wanted to know, the study used a talk pedometer, which records and then analyzes the words spoken by the parent and the child, and which can also then calculate the number of interactions between the parent and the child based on the time between the utterances spoken. So for the number of words during the typical day for these children, that varied from just over 4,000 to just over 34,000, so quite a wide range of number of words, and the number of interactions varied between 100 and just over 1,700. Now, I just told you that from LENA, the recommendation was 40 turns an hour. So if you think about a child being awake for 10 hours, that's 400 turns. So you can see that there's quite a variation in just this small study about what parents were able to do and be available for those interactions. Okay, next slide, please. So what's coming out when I was doing my research was studies showing that children who are interacting and talking with their parents while they're watching programming tend to have better language skills. We know that the interactions and the joint communication really supports children's language development. And what we're finding is if a parent's engaged with the digital content, that they're talking about what both are watching. You can describe what's going on as the parent. You can check that with the child that they're understanding. And actually now we've because lots of things are just on demand, you can then pause, you can talk about it, you can go back and watch it again. So there's lots of joint interest in what's going on and being with each other. When the children are watching by themselves and they've got greater quantity of screen use in terms of hours, or there's a background TV on, those are all associated with lower language skills. Okay, next slide, please. So what we do know, well, we do know, obviously, Ruth has talked about it as well, and Helen too, that digital media is all around us and very easily accessible. We know that it can negatively influence interactions between children and adults. And what we are trying to do in the SLT service is we're considering how to share information. And both Ruth and Helen have alluded to the fact that we've got lots of information that we can share with parents. And we're thinking about how do we share that information in a meaningful way that will help parents change their behaviors. And that's what we are asking people to do, is change behaviors. And that can be really challenging for some people. I was sitting when Helen and Ruth were talking about no bedrooms in the phone and no phones in the bedroom. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't do that. So we find behavior change difficult. We know other people find behavior change difficult, but we're thinking of things like positive use of digital media. So FaceTime for contact with families that live abroad. I've signposted parents to websites because they can't remember the songs they sang, or they don't know songs to sing with their children. So I'm saying, go along to this website and that'll help you remember songs, and then you can sing with your children. The website that I've put on this slide is BBC Tiny Happy People. Lots of activities on here for children based on age and stage, gives general information about general development. It gives specific information and advice regarding communication development. And all of that content has been created in collaboration with speech and language therapists across the UK. So I was just thinking, how does this fit in with my work life? And I was out on a home visit with a joint home visit with a health visitor last week for twins aged 2.5. And we walked into a living room and there was a large wall-mounted TV which was on, volume on as well. And we sat down and we were there specifically to talk about communication and how to support the kids. And I thought, actually, I will have to say, we'll need to turn the TV off. And so the parents were like, oh, okay. And I think they weren't really aware that it was on. You know, that it becomes just part of the background. It's almost becoming wallpaper. But I have to say, I'm happy to report that very quickly, both the parents and I and the children were on the floor, and we were playing, we were taking turns, and we were having fun. And so much so that they have requested that I go back and share more tips about supporting their children's communication development. Okay, next slide, please. So I was a bit like Ruth, and I found something. I thought, I'm just going to use that. So this slide has come from Hannon, which is another foundation that supports children's communication development. And really, like the speakers before, we know that that children are learning language through everyday interactions. We need them to be with the important people in their lives. We need those parents and caregivers to be spending time having fun and talking with their children. And we need to be aware that that might be impacted with digital media. So the key messages from us would be: interact with your child when you're watching shows together. Pay attention to what your child is watching. People are referencing educational programming. That's an interesting one, and that might be something for us to look at a bit more from a speech language therapy point of view, is how do we define what is educational programming? I have lots of children coming into speech language therapy and the parents are telling me, oh, well, they're doing really well because they're watching Miss Rachel. And I had a child in a group last week and I said, well, they only there is a bit of a challenge there because they're learning American Sign Language. They're not learning British Sign Language to use as a gestural form of communication as they're moving into spoken language. So it's thinking, parents are thinking, well, that's good because that's helping them to communicate, but there's maybe a nuance to what they're looking for. Try and follow those recommended guidelines that Helen was talking about. There's that lovely poster about screen time, no screen time for children under 2. Definitely know that that is not happening everywhere. And don't forget about books and playtime. So Ruth, I hear you when you say there's a little project about how do we help parents understand what play is. I would agree with you. And helping parents to play with their kids and have fun is really important. Okay, thanks very much. That's me.
Here's some references. And we are done. So there's lots of questions in the chat. I'm going to leave them to the end for a sort of panel discussion. And next is Una, and she's already shared a screen, so I'm off the hook here. Una, I'll leave you to introduce yourself.
Lovely, thanks so much. I'm Una Colmoyne. I'm one of the consultant ophthalmologists here in NHS Tayside, and so I'm going to talk about the impact of screen use on children's eye health. So I'm going to cover 2 topics. I'm going to cover myopia, which is what we know of as short-sightedness, and I'm going to cover strabismus, which is what is in lay terms called a squint. And this little girl here has a convergent squint with her left eye looking in, and she'll have double vision with it. So what is myopia? Short-sightedness means that you're in focus up close. So most people can look at their phone or read a book without their glasses. But in order to see the whiteboard at school or to drive, you need to put glasses on. And that's because people who are short-sighted have large eyes. So their eyes are longer from front to back than a normal-sighted person. And that means that their focus is short of the retina. In order to understand how short-sightedness develops, we'll look at normal eye development. And so at birth, you're born with a small eye at about 16 to 18 millimeters long front to back, and you're long-sighted, about +3. As you grow up until the age of about 10, your eye grows until it's about 23 millimeters long front to back, and you should have a prescription of about 0 at that age. What happens if you are becoming myopic is that between the ages of 0 and 10, your eye grows too much. And so, for example, if your eye grew to 26 millimeters in length, that would give you a prescription of about -6. And what triggers this to happen? What causes this excessive growth? And it's 2 factors. One is genetics and the other is lifestyle. And by lifestyle, we mean environment. And specifically for children, it's close work. It's been recognized for years. Children might previously have been called a bookworm, reading lots of books or doing lots and lots of studying. But these days, of course, it's the use of screens. And the problem with screens is that the worst thing is that children look at them very close up. So the more close you hold something as a child, the more likely you are for your eye to grow larger and for you to become myopic. And also the longer you spend doing very close work has the same effect. So if you spend a long time with something very close to your eyes, you're much more likely to become very short-sighted. So why do we mind if people are becoming short-sighted? It's not just the expense and the hassle of glasses and all that that entails. And obviously there are parts of the world where glasses are unavailable. The thing that we're really concerned about is that myopia puts you at risk of permanent vision impairment. And so that you might have heard of it referred to as vision impairment or partial sightedness, blindness, sight impairment. And that's the problem with being myopic. This is a list of the conditions which you are at increased risk of if you are myopic. These generally occur in adulthood, but they include young adulthood. So they have essentially got decades or lifelong effects on people's eye health. The top 6 or so on the list are milder, but they're also more common, and they particularly affect low to moderate myopes as well as high myopes. So people who are -2, -3, as well as people who are -6 or -10 and worse. And this is, for example, somebody with a retinal detachment, and that will require surgery to flatten the retina and protect them from sight impairment. The bottom half of that list are a much more severe group of diagnoses, which tend to affect people who are highly myopic, so people who are at least -6 or much more minus than -6. And unfortunately, these conditions do not have good treatment options. Either there's no treatment, or the treatment that is available is limited in its effectiveness. And this is how we go from saying that myopia can be caused, or certainly you're at increased risk of myopia with lots and lots of screen time, and myopia is bad for your eye health. This is particularly new. For the past 50 to 100 years, the world has been becoming more myopic, but in the past 10 to 20 years, the trend has accelerated. And by 2050, about 50% of the world will be myopic. This is the WHO World Report on Vision, where they've looked at the major diagnoses that people have across the world that put them at risk of sight impairment. And so these are common, and you'll have heard of them. They're discussed in the press. So age-related macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma. But all of those diagnoses are absolutely dwarfed by the 2.6 billion people in the world with myopia. This is a poster from an Australian group. And all of these recommendations are based on evidence. So prevention of myopia, I tell children to be outdoors. So at least 90 minutes outdoors every day. And they're Australian, so they talk about being sun smart. It's less of a problem here. The 20-20 rule, so every 20 minutes, take a break for 20 seconds and preferably look into the distance and ideally get up and walk around to give your eyes a break. The elbow rule, keep anything you're looking at least forearm distance from your face. And the 2-hour rule, less than 2 hours of screen time after school. This is a poster from Singapore, where I think it's about 95% of university students are myopic. So they're really keen on this. Keep myopia away, go outdoors and play. More time on ball games, walks, fun at the playground, less time on computer games, handheld games, and phones. I'm going to talk about strabismus now. Strabismus means a squint where your eyes are not straight. It is relatively uncommon for a child who has always had straight eyes with good vision and uses their eyes together. It is uncommon for that child to suddenly develop a squint. It did happen, it always happened, and it would be something that in NHS Tayside we would see maybe 1 or 2 children a year. About 10, 15 years ago, that was the numbers that we were seeing. And then in about 2020, with the COVID lockdowns, the pediatric ophthalmologists across the world had a parallel pandemic to deal with. And that was a huge increase in children presenting with acquired, so sudden onset, acquired squints with double vision, almost always with double vision, almost always turning in, so a convergent squint, and with double vision. And this was recognized to be as a result of the big increase of close work, because children went from being what we previously considered a normal lifestyle to spending their entire day on a screen, both for their education and for their relaxation. And so it wasn't something that was particularly reported frequently. It was a recognized diagnosis. No apologies for the busyness of the screen, because it really is important to recognize that since 2020, the publications of case series after case series of children presenting with acute onset squint with double vision, it's really important for us to understand this. And double vision is a really disabling symptom to have, and particularly for children where they're trying to engage with their education and develop their physical well-being as well. It can be dangerous, it's very upsetting, and it needs to be treated. We can't leave children with double vision. Obviously, you can put a patch on a child and that can look pretty cute like this picture, but it's not ideal. It's not considered a practical or an acceptable long-term treatment. It maybe just gets the symptom to go away for the first few days while we get them assessed and looked after. Prisms, as sported by Hillary Clinton during her campaign, these are an optical correction, so a fine plastic prism can be applied to the spectacles, and this doesn't change the squint at all, but it makes the double vision single, and that's good. But it's really probably ideal if you are an adult and you're mostly sedentary and you're looking straight through your glasses. If you're a child who we're trying to encourage to run around and play and move about, the prism is going to cause distortion of your vision, lots of lines in your vision, and blurry vision. So the mainstay of treatment for these types of squints is surgery. And while it is very successful, it has all of the risks and the limitations of having surgery on your eye and needing a general anesthetic. And so the advice, really, we come back to the first advice we gave in the first place, which is that prevention would be better than cure. Unfortunately, there's no cure for myopia. It's irreversible. And unfortunately, the treatment for the strabismus is pretty invasive surgery. And so we'd certainly advocate that prevention following these kinds of advice would be ideal. And that's everything from me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Una. As someone who's had 5 retinal detachments and a pre-cataract prescription of -4.5, -4, I have plenty of skin in the game for your talk. Very much. So I think we're on to our last speaker of the session. You've got a whole 8 minutes, Will, so no pressure.
Fantastic.
On you go.
Thank you. Give us all the opportunity for a screen break. So thank you, Helen and Una, for inviting me to contribute today's Grand Round. I'm Will Cook, Consultant Public Health Nutrition, based within Directorate of Public Health. Just want to shine a little bit of a light from a public health perspective on the rationale of the need to raise awareness of the negative social and health impacts of the screendemic that we're facing, that we've been hearing about this afternoon. And I just want to sort of make reference to the link here with the picture of a cyclist, tenuous link across to one of Tom's previous Grand Rounds where he was shoehorning in images of cycling, and also in reference to his hark back to the 1980s. So I saw this a bit of a challenge. This photo is from over 40 years ago, so well in the 80s. And believe it or not, this miserable looking boy was myself. It was actually one of the happiest days of my life. That's when I got my first proper bike. I used to get up first thing at the weekends while my parents were still in bed and ride laps around a small back garden, as I just love riding my bike so much. And even if I'd wanted to watch a screen at this time of day, it would have been a choice between watching sort of the test card image of the girl and the clown playing noughts and crosses, or a bearded man with leather elbow patches lecturing on an open university program. So today, my 5-year-old has got a bike that I could only have dreamt of, but I count myself lucky to have grown up in an environment without the exposure to screens that we're seeing our children and young people today facing. So as I said, I'm based within the Public Health Directorate. There are 3 sort of main domains of work. So firstly, health intelligence, we've got health protection and health improvement, which, as the name suggests, about supporting individuals and communities to make healthier lifestyle choices. So it includes things like nutrition, physical activity, but also screen time. And the definition that's most commonly used about what public health is, it's a science and an art of preventing disease, prolonging life, and promoting health through the organised efforts of society. But as this image on the slide shows, I think it's easier to visualise it as a river. What we can see here downstream on the banks of the river are heroic healthcare workers plucking people out that have fallen in. This represents those working in healthcare, treating people with ill health, whereas public health is about moving upstream, stopping people from falling in, and freeing up capacity in the efforts of those working furiously downstream. As you know, there's different levels of prevention. I'm going to focus on the left-hand side here, primary prevention. All levels are important, but primary prevention is about stopping problems happening in the first place. To keep it on track with today's conversation, it's about preventing obesity, and this has the greatest impact on population health. So this is recognised through the population health frame that was published back in the summer, which is one of a suite of health and social care reform products that were published. And it's got an overarching aim of enabling us in Scotland to live longer, healthier and more fulfilling lives. And it includes a specific focus on prevention. You can see the aim there at the top, but also just to draw your attention to the initial priorities. It's about embedding prevention into our systems and improving healthy weight, which is highly pertinent when you're thinking about the topic that we're discussing today and the impact that we've heard from other speakers that screen time is having on the health of our children, young people, and also us as adults. So change is needed. You can see here from the slide, life expectancy was steadily increasing up until around 2013, and it's now stalled, and in worst cases, it's actually getting worse. We also know that there's a large inequality in health expectancy, and those in the most deprived areas are living fewer years than those in the least deprived. Not only is life expectancy worsening, the number of people living with ill health has increased, and the burden of disease is going to increase by over 20% in the next 20 years. On the right, picture of a man, I call him the Marmot Man, based on Sir Michael Marmot's Determinants of Health. And this shows that only 20% of what shapes our health can be attributed to healthcare. The other 80% is made up from the building blocks of health that relate to social and economic factors. So are you living in a warm, safe house? Do you have a job? Do you have sufficient money? Do you have a good education? Our health behaviors, so are we eating a healthy, balanced diet? Are we being physically active? Are we having too much time spent on screens? And our physical environment, so is it safe where we live? Are there green spaces to go outside and play? And I think it's really important when we're talking about screen time to bear these factors in mind and consider the health inequalities that exist. I'd just like to highlight that there is good evidence that families in financially disadvantaged situations often have fewer resources to manage screen time effectively. And these families typically more likely to rely on screens to entertain or occupy their children due to limited access to alternative activities or safe outside spaces. So quickly just to put the lens on obesity before bringing back obesity with screen time, we're perhaps more used to thinking about the term malnutrition to describe situation or challenges faced by low-income countries, but the reality is this is an issue that we've been facing and will continue to face for some time in the UK. And the term malnutrition is an umbrella term to describe a state of poor health caused by too much, too little, or the wrong balance of energy or nutrients from food. And malnutrition in the UK is now commonly a result of high-calorie, low-nutrient foods that's driving obesity in children. And hand in hand with the sort of rise in food insecurity, which is being largely driven by austerity, this is making access to nutritious foods unaffordable for too many. And as a result, the NHS has seen a significant increase in the number of admissions for malnutrition amongst children, 76% increase since 2007, and much of this is driven by obesity. So obesity is extremely complex. I think we all know the environment we're living in is obesogenic. If you look at the image on the slide, behind those coloured spheres, you can see lots of lines and words. I like to think of this as really as a plate of spaghetti. And this is a systems map that was published in the Foresight report back in 2007 that looked at the many factors that determine our energy balance. So in the centre there, in the orange thick bits of spaghetti, it's basically calories in versus calorie out, and all the other lines, all the factors that influence that. And I think this really sort of highlights how complicated obesity is. And you can see the coloured spheres that sort of group key themes together that influence our energy balance, of things like societal influences, biological factors, and environmental factors. And really this sort of underlines why the common perception that we need to eat less, move more, be better educated about healthy eating is massively underestimating the vast array and complexity of factors that need to be addressed. So whilst there's many factors that contribute to childhood obesity, one important factor that I think is often being overlooked is excess screen time. And you can start to consider, looking at this map, how screen usage can actually influence these factors related to energy balance, so including things such as our activity levels, societal influence, food consumption, and also our biology. So the link between excessive screen time and childhood obesity risk has particularly gained traction in recent years due to the alarming rise in obesity levels worldwide, not least in Scotland and the UK. We know that the proportion of adolescents living with overweight or obesity has increased by 50% since 2008. And this increase is due in part to excess screen times. And as digital devices become more embedded in our daily lives and screen time is almost unavoidable, it's crucial to understand how it impacts on children's health and what it is we can do about it. So there is good evidence that there's a dose-response relationship between the number of hours per day children and young people spend looking at screens and the prevalence of overweight and obesity. And a recent systematic review and meta-analysis in over 100,000 children looked at this link and found that their higher screen time is associated with a 1.3 time increased chance of obesity. It's also interesting to note from this study that the strongest association was found between TV watching and obesity. No association was found for computer games or video games. And it was also found that the association was strongest in youngest children. And it's thought this might be because younger children typically have less structured time as part of the day. And a lot of this unstructured time is filled by parents or by the children themselves by watching screens. It's also been another large prospective study with over 7,000 adolescents followed over a 24-year period to look at the link between screen time and cardiometabolic risk factors. And it was found that for every additional hour of screen time per day was linked with an increased BMI, higher odds of having a high waist circumference, 9% greater odds of obesity, and nearly 20% higher odds of developing type 2 diabetes. So I think you can probably start to put together why these associations are being seen from the spaghetti diagram I presented earlier. Firstly, and perhaps most commonly, the association between screen time and BMI is centered on the idea that screen time is nearly always sedentary behavior that displaces physical activity from our day. Secondly, watching screens is associated with increased energy intake. And I'm sure many of us are guilty, and we know about the mindless eating that we commonly do when watching media or TVs or screens. And this has been shown that it leads to increased energy consumption without any increased feelings of hunger or compensatory behavior, i.e. reducing calorie intake during the rest of the day. I think most of us can relate to this. It's also really concerning when you start looking that many children consume a large proportion of their daily food in front of the screens. One study, for example, shown up to a third of daily calorie intake and half of children's meals were consumed in front of a screen. And I'd also argue that watching media through a screen is often a trigger or a prompt to eat or drink, even if we're not hungry. There's that strong association there. And that's before we start considering the commercial determinants of health and what our screens expose us to by way of advertising, high fat, sugar, salt foods. The good news is that from January next year, there's going to be a UK-wide ban on advertising of less healthy foods before the 9 p.m. watershed, and that includes on-demand viewing and online media as well. Finally, there's a really strong and consistent association with bedtime media use and inadequate sleep quantity, quality, and daytime sleepiness. And as we know, poor sleep is associated with increased obesity and weight gain in children. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to answer this question now in terms of what's the most single important thing we can do to reduce obesity. The reality is there is no single most important intervention. But what I would say in terms of screens and risk of obesity is that we should be aware of the relationship between screen time, reduced physical activity, and the impact on eating behaviors. And that as adults, we should be role models with how screens are used, including keeping screens off during meal times and before bed, and making time for screen-free activities. Screen time is manageable with awareness and proactive actions, and small changes do have big impacts on children's lives. There's great evidence out there showing that setting household screen rules, which cover things such as quality, quantity, and timing, actually have significant impact on reducing screen time and supporting better sleep. So over time, these small but consistent rules can have a lasting positive impact on children's physical and mental well-being and reducing the risk of developing unhealthy weight. Just to flag again, the same resources that have been referenced throughout, these are in use by our early years and young people team within public health, and also the nutrition and dietetic service use these as part of their child healthy weight service. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Well, that's fantastic stuff. So given that you've upped the ante here, I'll show you my picture. When I got that's Boxing Day 1980 something, when I got my first road bike. So we're in it together. I'll maybe we can compare what our current bikes look like another time. So we've run over time. It's now 2:05. So I'm afraid I have to go to clinic. What I am going to do though is leave this meeting open, because there are a number of questions in the chat, and I just wondered if our speakers might be able to just go into the chat and just respond to a few of those questions. I can then tag those on to the video so that they can go out on the YouTube video. So I'd be grateful if you could do that, and people may be able to stay. Okay, so I'll not close the meeting off. I'll let it run. So it only remains me to thank our speakers. I think, we had 90 people in here at the peak, and we had 40 people at the other talk at the Ronald Harden Awards. So it just shows the popularity of this topic. There's been a lot of interaction in the chat. Lots of people interested for very personal reasons with their own children, but also I think intellectually this is a very interesting topic. Next week it is the Ronald Harden Lecture, not to be confused with the Ronald Harden Awards, and that will be in the Wolfson Lecture Theatre. So that's upon level 7 in the medical school. Not the Ganachede Large Lecture Theatre, the smaller one that used to be Lecture Theatres 2 and 3 if you're as ancient as me. So please do come along in person if you can, but I will be doing it live streaming so you can watch it on a screen. So thank you, everybody. My eyes may have not gone square. I'm still here, and as always, bikes. Okay, thanks very much, everyone, and take care.
Hi, I'm happy to stay on for as many minutes if people want to ask any questions.
Thanks, Una. Likewise, I'm happy to stick around for a while longer. I'm just scrolling through the questions.
Yeah, same for me. I think is Ruth still here?
I am still here.
Because I was thinking, did I see one? And
answered,
Una as well.
I answered Pete's one.
I have a question. I don't know how to put my hand up on Zoom. It's all a bit complicated for me. My wonder is what next? And I know it's not for here, the people in the room particularly, and I've just put in the chat so it's captured somewhere else. Is there any scope, I'll put my camera on, sorry, for key messages that could be shared much more publicly? I think there are some professional guidance and data, the nice poster shared by Helen Dunn, for example, but is there something that can go on the back of a bus? Or is that even a possibility? Because it's clear from our conversations with our family and our neighbours that there's a lack of understanding about this in the general population. And just put that out there.
On nappy bags.
On nappy bags.
Yeah,
get Pampers to do it.
Yes.
That's a good answer.
Will,
are you the only one from population health here today?
I am. What I'm initially thinking is I've made reference to the population health framework. There's also work by PHS looking at sort of a child health specific element of that framework. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. So the resources that have been shared by the health professionals to Safer Screen, they're advocating for a public health campaign. To the best of my knowledge, that there isn't essentially administered campaign. I think we need to be looking at how we can advocate to push and support this. I agree. It is a gap at the moment, and a lot of the use of technology screens as in essence digital dummies is due to lack of awareness from parents. And I think many people would actually change their practice if they were aware or could hear what's been presented this morning or this afternoon.
Thank you. I agree. I have been educated myself. I thought I knew, but the information from ophthalmology and audiology and the wideness of this impact is the thing that's taken me slightly aback. We only know our little world, and I think that will be the same for most people.
I think what's quite interesting as well is Australia are going to be introducing a ban for, I think it's about 8 different platforms, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook and Instagram, so forth, from next month. And it'd be quite interesting to sort of see how that plays out in practice and what the impact would be.
The reason I knew that is it's a ban on under 16s, and there's a influencer family who have moved to the UK to get their 14-year-old round that ban so they can carry on putting out content.
Blimey.
I know, it's crazy. France have a ban from under 5-year-olds. They have a ban for under 5s. The schools there was a question in the chat about schools, and the schools are trying. In Perth and Kinross, they have officially banned phones in schools, but it's very variable about how it's been implemented. And the schools that have implemented it with the most success are the ones that had already given out iPads. So like they've got their iPads, but they aren't allowed to access all the things that they have on their phone on their iPad. And that's those schools it's working. But in the others, the kids say they need their phone to be able to access learning. So yeah, that's tricky.
Can I jump in there as well? Is that we have hearing aid apps on phones. So our deaf children use the app on their phone to work their hearing aid, and then they're not allowed. And it's just so complicated because you're like, so you one minute you're saying no, don't use screens, and then the next minute I'm giving the hearing aids out going, and you can use an app. So you just it's really challenging.
I don't know if anyone else saw in the BMJ sometime in the last year, there have been a couple of articles on this. And I can't remember who it was. It was somebody like the Child Health Commissioner or a very senior child health person, I presume a pediatrician. And there had been sort of calls for, saying they should be banned. It should be like other countries. And this person made the point that legislation probably won't work. And what you need is for it to be in the curriculum, both for parenting and for education. And so I think the back of the bus and on Pampers packets and all that kind of thing would probably help. But I think it has to go into be part of the curriculum, both for parenting and for education. And until the teachers are teaching it, I can't see how, because parents don't know. Parents are too old to teach, and it's too late. I think it has to be part of the conversation in education.
I've just added into the chat just a link to sort of an evidence document from the Health Professionals for Safer Screens group that's got it's got content relating to the use of screens during school time. I think it's clear that they've sort of made reference there that there is a need to use screens. They are part of education, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have a smartphone outside of school. And again, in terms of using phones or smartphones as medical devices, they're using sort of CGM monitors as an example here, but there's some guidance there as well. Also, on my last slide, there's Scottish Government guidance on mobile phones in Scotland schools, which is a useful document to look at, but I think it's probably in need of further update.
Can I jump in on Ruth's point? Ruth, we have similar issues with the AAC high-tech aid users for communication, but we can lock down the iPad to just use the communication app only. There's a setting, so that allows the child to focus and understand that the iPad is only for use as a talker. It can cause frustration, but it does help the wandering off and using it for just stimming with YouTube, for example, which is what can happen from time to time. I don't know if that's possible if it comes up in conversation with your app for hearing devices.
And that's handy to know. The problem is that we put it on the app for all the time, or they have the app, and it's so
available. But what they can't do is any other app.
Yeah, and then but then they're like, oh, but all my pals have got a phone and I've got a phone, and you're just that's the problem. I think it is the fact
you need
that
parental engagement and but if the parent said to you, how do I restrict use?
We can do that. We can do that. But I think that's where the problem lies, is the fact that the child without the phone is the unusual child. And you're right, Kate, information needs to be out there for families to understand, because I honestly don't think the parents that come into me know. And I also worry, like I mentioned earlier, that they don't know how to actually entertain their child without a screen, because they are entertained by a screen. And I think although we say, oh, don't do this, don't do that, I think we need a message as well of this is what to do. Because they just close, you can see them close down. As soon as you say don't use a screen, you can go, all right, okay, whatever, she's waffling on about that again. But actually, if we were to give them something in replacement, that might help them a little bit more.
I agree. I can't remember now if I did say this, but when they asked the parents about the digital media use in the Swedish research study, about 44% of them said that they would use digital media during playtime, because they don't really know I must have missed that. I skipped it by mistake, but they like I have seen parents go like, I don't really know how to play. And I think that's a challenge. And we're seeing children coming into nursery age 2 and age 3, and they don't really know how to play. So yeah. And there, for lots of families, there will be barriers to being a really good facilitator for play for your child. You know, some of it will be if the child was presenting with additional support needs, that play is going to have to look different. But also we have some parents who are just they're not available. Their capacity to be available to be that child's play partner isn't there because there's lots of other things going on in their lives that have to take priority. And particularly in Dundee, with the high level of deprivation, we have to be mindful of what other pressures people are, so it becomes like Will's, it becomes that whole bigger issue.
I just wanted
See,
to add on something to what you were saying there, Ruth. I'm Amy. I'm one of the children's occupational therapists, and something we saw in terms of our social media campaigns. I think, Kate, you might remember it was our lovely SLT colleagues that had way back a few years ago put up some posts around screen time use, and unfortunately it was met really unpositively by parents. Parents were quite angry and defensive about the post to the point where it had to come down, and it certainly hadn't been meant in a judgmental way. But I think there's a lot of stigma, I guess, around all of this, that some parents that are aware that maybe, but for the reasons that you're talking about, Sheena, rely on phones, or because phones are such a massive part of our everyday life. Like, even I was going to mention earlier that, my daughter has to order her lunch on her phone. I have to do almost everything to do with my daily life through my phone. And I remember getting judged as a young mum by my mother-in-law because I was seen as on my phone too much. But I was organising swimming lessons, and I was booking school lunches and paying for trips and doing my banking. And thankfully, I feel, hopefully, that I balance that with lots of interaction and playtime as well as. But I think parents can be quite defensive about these messages because everybody feels like they're trying, but actually there's so much that's been talked about today that is massive, and it's so important that this information just isn't held with us as professionals, but it's about how we do that that normalizes it, or is in a supportive way, rather than feeling like it's health professionals judging or saying, well, this is what you should be doing. Or like you say, you come into a clinic and then instantly say, oh, you shouldn't be on your phone. I've had parents in clinics on their phone throughout the entire session. And you can call it, but it can be really difficult to share some of these messages, I think. I think, Anthony, you're trying to speak, but it's on mute still.
Can I just ask completely from a different angle though as well, but that issue about how do you change behaviour without annoying people? And I think, Will, in public health, you must be doing that all the time, tearing your hair, I'm sure, trying to change behaviour thing. But how about this? Closer to home, what has happened to medical education that none of us know each other? These wise points we made. I'm mainly in the psychiatry thing. I don't know what any of my colleagues looks like. I've been here for 6 months now, except for my senior manager. But is this not an example of serious, potentially serious effects on? But serious, but it's not going to make anybody unwell. But effects on communication within an organization where everybody has their screen off. And I've now even started turning off my screen. So if we can't change our behavior, which is so from something that's so obviously abnormal, how on earth can we expect, and Will, how can we expect people who are in the midst of all those societal, genetic, environmental, financial complexities. How about that?
I would agree, Anthony. I don't know whether I'm going to come up, whether everybody can hear me. I'm Janet Dance from Cannes. And so I have put my picture on now.
Janet, I think I've seen your name everywhere. I've seen your name. Great to see you.
Yes, absolutely. However, I think it's one of those conundrums, because sometimes we get better audio, and the presentation can be given better if we put our screens off, because it decreases the bandwidth or whatever. So I think we're learning to do that, but then hopefully we can show our faces at other times.
But then it's once again, it's all technical. It's all technical.
Yeah,
it takes a boffin to sort out our societal problems.
That's
it takes
right.
a boffin to sort out our teaching problems.
Yeah,
The answers are not with the boffins.
no,
Anthony, I would suggest to you to start working out how you can meet in person. So for some things, I think what we can recognize as professionals is there is an efficiency in utilizing digital technology to our advantage. But I would say to you that what I notice in my work is that I spend an awful lot of time, well, I don't see it as a lot of time. I wonder would other people see it as a lot of time having general conversations with colleagues, and not just within speech and language therapy, but with education, with other health professionals. And there's the gain of that is so much more than the loss of time given to that. So I have good connections. I know who to go and ask questions to. I know they'll be able to give me the answers I want. Setting up collaborative working is much easier because we already have some knowledge of each other. So someone suggested that maybe we should lead on something in Tayside about a public health message, and I've just immediately said, well, I'll be up for that. But I've been doing a bit of I've been going into some population health stuff with Will, so I recognize his face, I recognize his voice, so I think there's lots to be said for it's making a case for when it's more that you need to do both. And the challenge that we've got as professionals supporting families with young children is that they're not awareness of the both aspects. They're seeing the benefits only of the digital media, and we're having to support that behavior change in that actually doing things without a screen is actually, for us, it's more valuable. So we need to try and work out, and you're absolutely right, behavior change is huge, and lots of work I do with community-based colleagues will tell you that behavior change takes a lot of time with a lot of support.
Great question, and I think it really is a dilemma. Sort of, digital is here to stay, and at points it is the best solution. But I think when looking at obesity, the reality is we've known about the problem for decades. It's continued to get worse. There's been loads of work, governmental policies and so forth thrown at it, continuing to see the challenge. And the thoughts and feeling behind why this is that actually it relies too much on individual behaviour change. We need to be taking away the requirement for people to actually individually change their behaviour, i.e. eat a little bit less, move a little bit more, instead of changing the environment we're living in. At the moment, we're sort of, in essence, really telling people to use their phones less. It's actually very hard, very difficult to do. We need to be enabling children to, this is my thought, not based on any evidence, but actually for children to be growing up when they're not exposed to smartphones, where it's not permissible for them to have that. And that would be so much easier than asking them to perhaps put it away at bedtime, not take it into school and so forth. So it really is a big major structural change that's required, rather than being reliant on in individual choices and changes in behaviour.